strongest man in the world died on his feet. When they counted the wounds on his body afterward, there were more than 400 of them. Sword cuts, gunshot wounds, cannon fire, a hole burned clean through his chest. And every single one of them was on his front, not one on his back. Because in 72 years, he had never once turned and run from anything, and he was not about to start with the last thing he ever did. He stood there, already gone, riddled through, and he would not fall. And here's the strange thing, the thing worth staying up a little while to sit with tonight. This man could have had anything. He carried a power the world honestly believed could break it in half. He was, by every account, the person alive who stood closest to the greatest treasure that has ever existed, the one piece, the thing every pirate in the world would die for. And he could have simply reached out and taken it and made himself the king of everything there is. And he never did. He never even tried. Because the strongest man in the world did not want to be a king. He wanted to be a father. Tonight, slowly, and with nowhere else in the world to be, we are going to sit with the philosophy of Edward Newgate, the pirate the whole world knew as Whitebeard, and with the quiet, enormous idea he built his entire life around, that the only thing truly worth having in the end is a family, and that the only real death is to be forgotten. So get comfortable. Dim your screen right down, settle back, and if you'd like to close your eyes and just listen, that is exactly what tonight is for. We are in no hurry at all. He waited 72 years to be understood. We can take a couple of quiet hours. Here is how tonight works. You do not need to have watched a single episode of One Piece to follow along, and you do not need to remember any of it. I will explain everyone we meet as we go, and there is no test at the end of this. This is not really a lesson about a cartoon pirate anyway. It is a long, slow think about family and loneliness, and how a person decides to spend the one life they get. Dressed up in the story of a giant of a man with a white mustache who loved people for a living. If you're still awake when we reach the end, I am glad of the company. If you drift off somewhere in the middle, that is completely fine, and quietly the whole idea. I will keep talking softly the whole way through. If you would like to subscribe while you're settling in, it helps these get made and it is free. But truly, do not get up. Just let your eyes go heavy and let an old man's story carry you down. Let's begin, as these things should, with the size of him and with the loneliness that came with it. To understand Whitebeard, you have to understand what it means to be the strongest, because the whole shape of his philosophy grows out of that one hard fact like a tree grows out of a cliff. In the world of One Piece, the seas are ruled at the top by 4 titanic pirates. The world calls them the 4 emperors. And for a long time, Whitebeard was reckoned the mightiest of them all, the strongest man in the world, not one of the strongest. The strongest, full stop. The way you might say the tallest mountain or the deepest sea. When he and his great rival, the future king of the pirates, clashed in their prime, people said the very sky cracked from the force of it. He ate a fruit that let him shatter the air itself like a pane of glass, that let him take hold of the sea and tip it, that could raise walls of water tall enough to swallow a fleet. The world genuinely believed that if he ever chose to, he could crack the planet in two. That is not a metaphor in his story. That is the literal appraisal of the people who feared him. He was a walking earthquake with a heartbeat. And here is the loneliness that lives inside a fact like that. And it is worth sitting with for a moment because most of us will never feel it, and all of us can understand it. When you are the strongest thing in the world, there is no one above you and there is no one beside you. Every relationship you have is unbalanced by definition. Every person who comes near you is weaker than you, wants something from you, fears you, or wants to test themselves against you. You cannot be protected because there is no one strong enough to protect you. You cannot lean on anyone because you would crush them. The very thing that makes you a legend makes you, in a deep and permanent way, alone. Power, it turns out, is a kind of isolation with a crown on it. And most people, given that power, do exactly what you would expect. They reach for more of it, more territory, more fear, more gold, more of the thing that got them there, trying to fill the loneliness with the very substance that caused it. That is the ordinary tragedy of the strong. And you do not have to be the strongest pirate in the world to know the shape of that loneliness, because it comes in smaller sizes that fit ordinary lives. Anyone who has ever been the strong one in a family knows it. The person everyone leans on, who has no one to lean on themselves. Anyone who has been the capable one, the one who has their life together, the one who always copes and found that their very competence somehow held people at a distance. That being the rock meant never being held. There is a particular ache in being the person others need but no one worries about, in being admired instead of comforted, in slowly discovering that the strength you built to protect yourself has quietly walled you in. Whitebeard's loneliness is only the enormous, mythic version of a thing most of us taste at some point, that the very parts of us that make us useful to others can be the parts that keep us alone. And his whole life turns out to be an answer to it, but not the answer you would expect. The obvious answer to the loneliness of strength is to get stronger, to build the wall higher, to need no one so that no one can leave you. That is what most powerful people do, and it never works because it treats the symptom as the cure. Whitebeard did the opposite. He, the most invulnerable man alive, chose deliberately to make himself vulnerable, to need people, to love them, to build a family he could lose. He understood that the only real cure for the loneliness of being strong is the willingness to depend on someone and to be depended on, and to accept the terrible risk of loss that always comes bundled with love. Strength could never save him from being alone. It was the thing making him alone. Only choosing to love could save him from that. And so he chose it, on purpose, with his eyes open, over and over. 1,600 separate times he opened a door he knew could be walked back out of, because a life with people in it and all the danger of losing them was so much better than a fortress with no one inside. Whitebeard did something else. Whitebeard looked at all of that power, all of that isolation, and he made a decision that almost no one at the top of the world has ever made. He decided that the point of being strong was not to take, it was to shelter. He would use the most frightening power on the seas not to build an empire, but to build a home. A place where the people the world had thrown away could come and be safe, and be fed, and be loved, and belong to something. He turned his strength inside out. He made a fortress of himself, and then he filled it, not with treasure, but with people. And every single one of those people he called his son. And every single one of them called him Pops. Hold that word gently. Pops, father, the old man, because it is the key to everything else tonight. The most dangerous man in the world spent his life trying to be somebody's dad, and there is a paradox in that which is worth turning over slowly because it overturns something most of us quietly believe. We tend to assume that gentleness is what you settle for when you are not strong enough to take, that kindness is a consolation prize for the weak, and that if people were only powerful enough, they would of course reach out and grab everything they could. Whitebeard is a living refusal of that assumption. He was the strongest, and he was the gentlest, and the two were not in tension at all. The gentleness was what he did with the strength. It is the truly insecure who need to dominate, the truly frightened who need to conquer, the ones with something to prove who cannot stop proving it. Whitebeard had nothing left to prove to anyone. He was, by universal agreement, the strongest man alive. The argument was over. And so he was entirely free to spend that strength on tenderness. The people who most need to take are almost always the people who feel, underneath, that they do not have enough. And the people secure enough to give without limit are almost always the ones who have stopped being afraid. His generosity was not the absence of strength. It was strength that had finally relaxed, that had nothing to defend, that could at last turn outward and become shelter instead of armor. That is a quietly hopeful idea to hold because it suggests that the meanest, most grasping, most domineering behavior in the world is not really strength at all, but its opposite, wearing strength's clothes. Fear dressed up as power. And it suggests that the real mark of having become strong, truly strong, in whatever way a life allows you to become strong, is not that you finally get to take what you want, but that you finally stop needing to. That you become, at last, safe enough inside yourself to be gentle. The strongest man in the world had no interest in throwing his weight around because a person who is genuinely secure in what they are simply does not need to. He had climbed all the way to the top of strength and discovered that the view from up there was not a view of everything he could seize. It was a view of everyone he could protect. That is what strength is for. he decided, not taking, sheltering. And he was strong enough and secure enough to mean it. Now let's go all the way back to the beginning, to a poor and forgotten little island, and see where a hunger like that is born. The philosophy of Whitebeard begins on an island called Sphinx, and it begins with an orphan who had nothing. We are told very little about his childhood. The story keeps it deliberately dim, the way real memory keeps the earliest years dim. But we are told the two things that matter. He was an orphan, and the place he came from was poor. Not picturesque poor, not humble, but happy poor. Sphinx was a lawless, destitute little rock, a place too broke to even keep up its membership in the world's government, a place the wider world had essentially written off and forgotten. That is where he started, a parentless child on an island that the world itself had decided did not count. And I want you to sit with that starting point quietly, because a person's whole philosophy is so often a lifelong answer to the first wound. Some children who grow up with nothing spend the rest of their lives grabbing, hoarding money, hoarding power, hoarding safety, trying to build so high a wall of having that the old poverty can never reach them again. That is one way the wound heals crooked, but there is another way, rarer and stranger, and it is Whitebeard's way. Some children who grow up unwanted decide, somewhere down in the place where a person decides these things, that they will spend their lives making sure no one else ever has to feel the way they felt. That the hole in them will not be filled by getting, but by giving the exact thing they never got. A boy with no family becomes a man who cannot stop making one. He looked at his own childhood, the hunger, the not belonging, the sense of being a person the world had no room for. And instead of turning it into greed or bitterness or armor, he turned it into an enormous, aching, lifelong generosity. He would become the father he never had to every child the world tried to throw away forever. That is the seed of the whole thing. Everything else tonight, the crew of thousands, the war that ended him, the standing death, all of it grows out of a poor orphan on a forgotten island deciding that no one else was going to be as alone as he had been. He never really left Sphinx behind either. When he was powerful, he took the little island under his protection, this worthless rock the world had forgotten, and made it a place that was safe because he was from there, and he did not forget where the hunger started. The strongest man in the world kept a poor man's heart in his chest to the very end. Remember the island. We will come back to it softly when it is time to say goodnight. And there is a gentle, useful truth hidden in the way he answered his first wound, one worth carrying out of the story and into your own life, whatever your own first wound happened to be. It is this, that we do not get to choose the hand we are dealt at the start, but we do, slowly, over a whole lifetime, get to choose what we make of it. Two children can grow up with the exact same emptiness, the same hunger, the same sense of not belonging, and one will spend their life trying to fill the hole by taking, and grow hard and grasping and never full, and the other will spend their life filling other people's holes instead, and somehow, in the giving, quietly heal their own. The wound is the same, the response is a choice. Whitebeard is the picture of the second kind of person, the one who takes the worst thing that ever happened to them and turns it deliberately into the thing they most want to spare others. Psychologists have a plain phrase for something like it. They might call it turning your pain into purpose. The story just calls it becoming pops. Either way, it is one of the most quietly heroic things a human being can do. To be hurt and to decide that the hurt stops with you, that you will be the one who breaks the chain, that no one on your watch will have to feel what you felt. He decided that at the bottom of the world, on a poor island, as a boy with nothing. And he spent 72 years making it true. Now, from the poorest of beginnings, let's meet the family he built, starting with the son who first came to him with a knife. There is a moment in the story of Whitebeard that tells you almost everything about him, and it begins with a young man trying to murder him. His name was Ace, Portgas D. Ace, and he was, though almost no one knew it, the son of the king of the pirates himself, born under a death sentence simply for whose blood he carried. Ace was fire in every sense, proud and angry and carrying a wound about his own birth so deep it had its own gravity. And when this furious young man set out to make a name on the seas, he set his sights on the biggest name there was. He decided he would defeat Whitebeard, and he threw himself at the old man to do it. Not once. The story tells us he attacked Whitebeard over 100 times, more than 100 separate attempts to kill the strongest man in the world. And Whitebeard beat him every time. Effortlessly, the way the sea beats a swimmer, without cruelty and without much effort, simply because that is what the sea is. 100 times this boy came at him with everything he had, and 100 times the old man put him down and let him live. And then, and this is the moment, instead of finally killing this persistent, dangerous, furious young man who kept trying to end his life, Whitebeard offered him a place at the table. He looked at the boy who had tried to murder him 100 times, and he said, in effect, "You're strong and you're alone and you're angry and you have nowhere to belong. Stop trying to kill me. Come and be my son." Think about the philosophy hidden in that, because it is not soft and it is not naive. It is one of the most radical ideas a powerful person can hold. Whitebeard looked at hostility and saw hunger underneath it. He looked at a boy throwing punches and understood that a person only fights the world that hard when the world has never once held them. He did not require Ace to earn his love by being good or grateful or safe. He offered it first to someone who had given him every reason not to. That is what grace is when you strip the word down. Love that arrives before it is deserved. Love that is not a wage paid for a good behavior, but a gift given to fill a need. Ace, of course, did not accept right away. Pride like that does not fold in a day. But the offer stood patient and open, and eventually the angriest young man on the sea laid down his knife and picked up a place in a family and became the 2nd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates, loved no differently for being the son of the man who had been Whitebeard's greatest rival. Blood didn't matter, only belonging did. Hold on to Ace. His story and the old man's are the same story, and it does not end gently. But it ends with the truest words in all of this, and we will get there when the night is darker. For now, let him be the boy who came with a knife and was handed a home instead. And it is worth sitting a while longer with what Whitebeard actually saw when he looked at Ace, because it is a way of seeing people that could change how you move through your own days. Most of us, when someone comes at us with hostility, a sharp word, a cold shoulder, an attack, respond to the surface of it. We meet anger with anger, coldness with coldness, a knife with a knife, because the hostility feels like the whole truth of the person. Whitebeard had the rarer gift of looking straight through the hostility to the wound underneath it. He understood deep in his bones that a person only fights the world that hard, that relentlessly, that hopelessly, when the world has never once made them feel safe. That the angriest people are very often the most frightened, and the most frightened are very often the most unloved. Ace's 100 assassination attempts were not really about killing Whitebeard at all. They were a boy screaming into the void, asking whether anyone was strong enough to withstand him, whether there was anything solid enough in the world to be trusted, whether he mattered enough for anyone to bother staying. And Whitebeard heard the question underneath the violence, and answered the question instead of the violence. He said, in effect, yes. I can take everything you throw at me and I will still be here, still offering you a place, because I can see that you are not dangerous, you are drowning. That is a kind of love that requires enormous strength. Not the strength to win a fight, but the strength to not take the bait, to see past the fist to the frightened person swinging it. Imagine being seen like that on the worst day of your worst year by someone who refused to be scared off by your ugliest self. That is what he offered, not to the deserving, to the drowning. Now let's talk about that word everyone called him, because a name can be a whole philosophy in a single syllable. Every man in Whitebeard's enormous crew, and there were around 1,600 of them, organized into 16 divisions, each led by a commander, plus dozens of allied crews sailing under his flag, a floating nation of the world's cast-offs. Every single one of them called him the same thing. Pops. In his own language, the word was Oyaji, not a title, not captain, not boss, not your grace. Oyaji. Old man, father, dad. Think about how strange that is and how deliberate. This was a man who could have demanded any title in the world. He could have made them call him king or emperor or god, and they would have gladly, out of love or fear or both. and instead the strongest man in the world asked to be called Dad. He chose the humblest, warmest, most ordinary word there is, the word a small child cries in the night, and he wore it as the only crown he ever wanted. That choice is the whole man in miniature, because a title like king is about what you rule. A word like pops is about who you love. One points outward, at your dominion, at the size of what you have conquered. The other points inward, at your kitchen table, at the people you are responsible for feeding. Whitebeard understood, in a way that almost no one with his kind of power ever understands, that being a father is a bigger thing than being a king, harder, humbler, and infinitely more rare. Any strong enough, ruthless enough person can build an empire. History is a long, gray parade of them, and we forget their names. But to take 1,600 dangerous, broken, unwanted people and make them feel every day that they belong to someone who would die for them, that is a kind of strength that has nothing to do with the fruit he ate or the air he could shatter. That is the strength of simply deciding to care for people at scale, forever, without getting tired of it. He renamed his own power. He took the most feared name on the seas and made it mean father. And every one of his sons would, before the end, charge an entire navy to save one of their brothers, because that is what the word pops had come to mean to them. It meant someone would come for you, no matter what. Someone always would. And notice what he did to the very idea of fatherhood, because it is quietly revolutionary. We tend to think of being a father or a mother as something that happens to you through biology. You have a child, and the title arrives with the birth. Whitebeard uncoupled the two completely. He had no children of his blood, and he became the most father a person has ever been, to thousands, purely by choosing to be. He proved that fatherhood is not a fact of biology at all, but an act of the will. A thing you do, not a thing you are. A daily decision to be responsible for someone, to feed them and defend them and believe in them and grieve them, whether or not you share a single drop of blood. There are people listening tonight who were fathered in that truest sense by someone who did not have to. A grandparent, a coach, a teacher, an aunt, an older friend, a stranger who simply decided to care. And there are people listening who have been that person for someone else. That is the Whitebeard kind of fatherhood, and the story insists that it is not a lesser version of the real thing, but the realest version there is, because it is chosen freely, with nothing owed and nothing forcing it, purely out of love. And there is something in his choice of that one small word, pops, oyaji, dad, that rewards a moment's thought as you drift. Of all the things a person can be to others, why is father the one he wanted? Because a father at his best is a particular kind of love, not the love of an equal, not the fierce, brief love of a romance, but the love that shelters and expects nothing back. The love that feeds you when you are small and cannot feed yourself, that stays up worrying while you sleep, that would step in front of the danger without a thought, that wants, more than anything, simply for you to grow up safe and become yourself and be free. It is love pointed entirely at another person's flourishing, with the self almost entirely out of the way. That is what the strongest man in the world wanted to be. Not worshipped, not obeyed, not feared, just depended on in that quiet, sheltering, self-forgetting way. He wanted to be the one who stays up worrying, and he got his wish 1,600 times over. Now, not everyone in his family was a son. There was one man he called something else, brother. And the story of how they met tells us what Whitebeard truly valued in a person. Long before the war that ended him, a wild and brilliant young man forced his way onto Whitebeard's ship. His name was Odin, Kozuki Odin, the heir to a noble family in a distant, closed country, a man too big for any room, loud and reckless and impossibly strong, the kind of person who is either going to be a hero or a disaster, and often both in the same afternoon. And when Odin decided he wanted to join the crew, Whitebeard did not simply say yes, and he did not simply say no. He gave him a test. He set Odin to hold on. The story has him gripping a massive chain, an anchor, an impossible weight, and told him that if he wanted to sail with them, he had to hold on and not let go, no matter what. It was a test of will, of resolve, of whether this loud young man had the sheer, stubborn strength to belong among the strongest crew on the seas. And Odin held on. He gripped that impossible weight, and he would not let go, hour after hour, proving exactly the resolve the test was designed to measure. And then something happened out in the water. Someone in danger, a life about to be lost. And Odin, still holding on, still passing the test, saw it. And he let go. He released the weight and failed the test, and threw himself into the sea to save a drowning stranger, giving up his place in the crew to do it. And Whitebeard took him anyway. That is the point. The old man had set a test of obedience, hold on no matter what. And the answer he was actually hoping for was the one that broke the rule. Because Whitebeard did not, in the end, want a crew of people who would follow an order no matter what. He wanted people who would let go of the order the instant a life was on the line. People whose deepest instinct, underneath the strength and the ambition, was to save someone. Odin failed the test of obedience and passed the only test that mattered to Whitebeard, which was the test of character, and Whitebeard loved him for exactly the thing that made him fail. He would come to call Odin not a son, but a brother. The one man in all his enormous family he considered a true equal rather than a child. Because Odin had shown him in a single choice that he understood the thing Whitebeard had built his whole life around, that no rule, no goal, no test, no treasure is worth more than a person in front of you who needs saving. Everything is negotiable except that. That was the family creed, revealed in a boy letting go of a chain. And it is worth pausing on how unusual a leader that makes him, because most people in charge of anything want exactly the opposite of what Whitebeard wanted. Most leaders, most bosses, most captains prize obedience above everything. They want people who will follow the order, hold the line, do as they are told, not make trouble. And there is a reason for that. Obedience is safe and predictable and easy to command. But obedience is also, in the end, a kind of emptiness, because a person who will do whatever you say is a person who has handed you their conscience, and a crew of them is not a family, it is a machine. Whitebeard did not want a machine. He set Odin a test of obedience and secretly hoped he would break it, because what he was really testing for was the thing that lives underneath obedience and is far more valuable and far more rare. A person's own moral center, the instinct that fires before any order can reach it, the reflex to save the drowning stranger even at the cost of everything you have been told to do. He wanted people who were good when it was inconvenient. He wanted people whose kindness could not be commanded because it did not run on commands at all. There is a quiet wisdom in that for anyone who has ever had to judge another person's character. A friend, a partner, a new hire, a stranger. You learn almost nothing about someone by watching them follow the rules. When following the rules is easy and rewarded, you learn everything about them by watching what they do when the rule and the right thing pull in opposite directions. When obeying would cost them nothing and breaking the rule would cost them dearly and save someone else. That is the moment a person's real self steps forward. Odin failed the easy test and passed the true one, and Whitebeard, who had been watching for exactly that, loved him instantly and forever, and called him not son but brother, the one man he considered a true equal, because Odin had shown him in a single unhesitating choice that his goodness was his own, uncommanded, unpurchasable, wired straight into him beneath the level where orders operate. That is the kind of person you want in your family, not the one who always does as they are told, the one who, when it truly counts, does what is right instead. Now let's go up, to the very top of the world, to a quiet drink between two kings, one of whom knew he was about to die. Before Whitebeard was called the strongest man in the world, there was one man who stood beside him at that height, his great rival, the pirate who would become known as the King of the Pirates, Gul D. Roger. For years, the two of them were the twin poles of the age, equals in a way that no one else was equal to either of them, and when they fought, the story tells us the very sky trembled. But a rivalry at that altitude is a strange and lonely kind of love. When you are the strongest, your rival is the only person in the entire world who is standing where you are standing, who feels what you feel, who understands the weight of it. Your enemy at that height becomes the only one who can truly keep you company. And so Roger and Whitebeard were rivals, yes, but they were also, in the deepest sense, the only two people in the world who were not alone when they were together, because each was the only one the other could not crush. And then Roger did something that stopped the world. He was dying. An incurable illness, the story tells us, was taking him from the inside. And rather than hide from it, he turned himself in. He let the government capture him, and he arranged to be executed in public, in the town where he was born, at the height of his fame. But before he walked to that scaffold, he came to see his old rival one last time. He came aboard Whitebeard's ship, and the two of them drank together, two kings at the end of an age, and Roger told his friend the things he had learned at the very end of the world, because Roger had done what no one else ever had. He had reached the final island, the end of all the seas, and there he had found the true history of the world, a history the government has spent 800 years killing people to keep buried. And Roger spoke to Whitebeard of that history, and of a will that had been waiting 8 centuries to be inherited, and of a promise the world had made and broken long ago. He did not hand Whitebeard a map. He did not offer him the treasure. What passed between them was not loot. It was something much larger and much quieter. The shape of a future entrusted from one dying king to the only man who could understand its weight. And Whitebeard listened and did not take it. This is the thing to hold on to. Roger, in a sense, offered him the keys to the whole world, the knowledge, the direction, the head start on the greatest treasure in existence. And Whitebeard let it pass through his hands like water, because he understood something Roger understood too there at the end, that the treasure was not the point. That the point was the will, the dream, the thing that gets handed down and carried on after the body that carried it is gone. Roger was not trying to make Whitebeard rich. He was trying to make sure the future had somewhere to land. Two old rivals at the top of the world discovering that the deepest thing they shared was not their strength at all, but the knowledge that strength ends and that the only thing that outlives you is what you pass on. Keep that quiet drink in your mind as the night goes on, because everything that happens to Whitebeard at the very end is him doing, for the whole world, what Roger did for him on that ship, handing the future to people he would never see and trusting them to carry it. There is something worth lingering on too in the particular loneliness of those two men, and the strange comfort they took in each other, because it says something true about rivalry that our usual stories miss. We are taught to think of a rival as an enemy, the person you must beat, the obstacle between you and the top. But at a certain height, a rival becomes something else entirely, the only person who truly understands you. When Roger and Whitebeard sat drinking on that ship, they were not two enemies calling a truce. They were the only two people in the entire world who knew what it was to carry that particular weight. And so, in a deep way, they were each other's only real company. The person who pushes you hardest, who matches you, who refuses to let you coast, that person ends up knowing you more intimately than almost anyone, because they have spent a lifetime studying you, taking your measure, meeting you at your fullest. There's a kind of love that can only exist between rivals, and it is a clear-eyed, unsentimental, bone-deep respect that no flattery could ever produce. And when one of them was dying, it was to the other that he came. Not to a friend, not to family, but to the rival who could actually understand the size of what he was letting go of. Roger did not come to Whitebeard for comfort. He came because Whitebeard was the only one who could receive what he had to give. The weight of the future, the shape of the dream, the knowledge of how the story would have to go on without either of them. Two kings at the end of an age, handing the world quietly to the young, understanding, as only they could, that their strength had never really been theirs to keep, that it had always been on loan, and that the only thing to do with it, at the end, was to make sure it landed somewhere good after they were gone. That drink is the whole philosophy of legacy in a single scene. Everything ends. The only question is whether you spend your last strength clutching at what you cannot keep or handing it, open-palmed, to whoever comes next. Now let's stay with that idea, the treasure he would not reach for. Because his refusal is the center of everything. He was called, among his other titles, the man closest to the One Piece. Think about what that phrase actually means. The one piece is the treasure at the end of the world, the thing every pirate who has ever lived has bled and died to find, the prize that Roger himself left waiting at the final island for someone worthy to claim it. And of all the people alive, the world reckoned that Whitebeard was the closest to it, strong enough to reach it, positioned to claim it, the single most likely person in existence to become the next king of the pirates and take the throne of the whole age. It was, more or less, his for the taking. And he did not take it. In a lifetime on the seas, the strongest man in the world never once seriously reached for the greatest prize in the world, though it sat, in effect, within his grasp. Why? This is the question at the dead center of his philosophy, and the answer is the simplest and the strangest thing about him. He did not want it. He did not want to be king. A crown is a lonely, cold, outward thing. It is about ruling, about dominion, about being above. And Whitebeard had already had his fill of being above. Being above was the very loneliness he had spent his life escaping. What use is the throne of the world to a man whose actual wish is to not eat dinner alone? The one piece could make him king of everything, and king of everything is just the loneliest chair there is, set one step higher than every other chair. It could not give him the one thing he wanted, which was to be needed and to be called Pops and to have somewhere warm to belong. So he let it sit at the end of the world, untouched, and he built the thing he actually wanted instead. Not a kingdom, but a family, not a throne, but a table with 1,600 places set at it. There is a quiet radicalism in that refusal that is easy to miss. We live in a world and tell each other stories that mostly assume the strong will want to rule, that power naturally reaches for more power, that the arrow only ever points up. Whitebeard is a story about a man who had every reason and every means to climb to the very top, and who looked at the top and saw how cold and empty it was up there, and chose instead to build something warm at a lower altitude and fill it with people. He measured his life not by how high he had climbed, but by how many people were safe because of him. He is, in the end, an argument, a big, gentle, mustachioed argument, that the point of getting strong was never to win. It was to have enough shelter in your hands to keep the people you love out of the rain. The treasure was real. He just wanted a different treasure, and he already had it. And it was sitting all around him, calling him Pops. And this is, if you follow it out, one of the most quietly countercultural ideas the whole story contains. And it is worth letting it land on your own life as you lie there. We are all, in 100 small ways, told to want the crown, to climb, to accumulate, to get to the top, to win, to have more than we have. The whole machinery of the world runs on the assumption that more is better, and higher is better, and winning is the point. And here's a story about the single most powerful person in existence, the one being who could have had the absolute top of everything, looking at all of it and saying gently, "No, thank you." Not because he was weak or lazy or lacked ambition. He had more raw power and drive than anyone alive, but because he had figured out something most people spend their whole lives failing to figure out, which is what he actually wanted. And what he wanted was not up. What he wanted was warm. He had done the hard, clarifying work of knowing his own heart, and his heart did not want a throne. It wanted a table with people at it. So he did not waste a single year of his life chasing a prize that could never have satisfied him, no matter how shiny it was, no matter how much the world insisted it was the thing to want. There is a freedom in that which is almost dizzying. Think of how much of human misery comes from chasing things we don't actually want, but have been told we should. The promotion that costs us our evenings with the people we love, the bigger house that just means more rooms to be lonely in, the wind that turns to ash the moment we have it because it was never the thing our heart was actually asking for. Whitebeard was free of all of that, and his freedom came from a single act of honesty, knowing what he truly wanted, and then having the nerve to want it out loud, even when it was the least ambitious-looking wish in the world. The strongest man alive wanted to not eat dinner alone. And instead of being ashamed of how small that sounds next to a throne, he built his entire magnificent life around it and died richer in the only currency he cared about than any king who ever lived. The lesson is not that ambition is bad. The lesson is to make very sure before you spend your one life climbing that the thing at the top of the ladder is the thing you actually want, because a lot of people reach the top of the wrong ladder and find the loneliest chair in the world waiting for them there. He never climbed the wrong ladder. He knew what he wanted, and he wanted a family, and he went and got one. Now let's turn to the hardest part of loving everyone, the son who took that love and used it as a knife. Because a philosophy of family this open, this unconditional, this willing to take in the dangerous and the unwanted has a cost, and the story is honest enough to make Whitebeard pay it. Among the boys he had taken in decades before was one who came to him at around 12 years old, a strange, restless, endlessly patient young man named Teach. Whitebeard did for Teach exactly what he did for everyone, gave him a home, a place, a family, no questions asked about where he came from or what he might become. And Teach lived in that family for a very long time. But Teach wanted something. He had wanted it quietly for decades. A specific power, a specific devil fruit. One so rare he was willing to wait half a lifetime for it to surface. And when it finally did, when that fruit at last came into the crew's hands, Teach did the one thing that a family like Whitebeard's holds as absolutely unforgivable. He murdered one of his own brothers, a beloved commander named Thatch, to steal it. And then he fled into the night, a son who had broken the only real rule there was, you do not kill your brothers. Sit with what that did to the old man because it is the shadow side of everything beautiful about him. Whitebeard's whole life was the belief that you take people in without conditions, that you offer love before it is earned, that you do not hold a person's past or their blood against them. And here was the proof that such love is not safe, that if you open your family to everyone, you will, sooner or later, open it to someone who will use your open hand to stab you. Teach was the risk of Whitebeard's entire philosophy made flesh, the living cost of loving without a background check. And a lesser man, a more ordinary man, might have learned the ordinary lesson from it. Close the door, trust no one, love only the safe. But Whitebeard did not close the door. Even knowing what it had cost him, even grieving Thatch, he went on being exactly who he was. Because he understood something that the cautious never understand. That a love which only extends to the safe and the deserving is not really love at all. It is just an investment. The whole point, the whole risk, the whole meaning of the thing is that you give it to people who might betray you because most of them won't, and the ones who receive it are saved by it. And that is worth the wound from the one who doesn't. He kept his hand open. It had been stabbed, and it would be stabbed again before the end, and he kept it open anyway. That is not naivety. That is the most deliberate kind of courage there is, because here is the quiet, difficult truth that the story is brave enough to face through Teach, and that is worth facing yourself softly in the dark. To love openly is to be permanently at risk. There is no version of a truly open heart that is also a safe one. If you decide to let people in, really in, the way Whitebeard let people in, then you have decided to accept that some of them will hurt you, that you cannot know in advance which ones, and that the same door you hold open for the person who will become your dearest son is the door through which betrayal will one day walk. Most people, having been burned once, quietly close the door a little. They love more carefully after that, more conditionally, keeping something in reserve, running a background check on the heart before they let it come close. It is entirely understandable. It is also, the story gently suggests, a slow way of dying while still alive. Because a heart that has walled itself off to avoid being hurt has also walled itself off from the very thing that makes a life worth living. Whitebeard's greatness is that he took the wound and did not close the door. He grieved Thatch, and he knew, with total clarity, that his open-handedness had cost him a son and would cost him more. And he kept his hand open anyway, because he had done the terrible math and come out the other side of it. He had worked out that a love which only extends to the safe and the proven is not really love at all. It is a transaction, an investment with the risk hedged out, and it cannot do the one thing love is for, which is to reach the people who most need it, who are precisely the dangerous and the unproven and the unwanted. The whole worth of the thing is that you give it without a guarantee. He decided that the son who would betray him was a price worth paying for the hundreds who would be saved, and he paid it with his eyes open again and never once let the betrayal make him smaller. That is not softness. Softness closes the door after the first wound. What Whitebeard had was something much harder and much rarer, a courage that had counted the cost of loving openly, found it terribly high, and chosen to pay it anyway, forever. To keep loving after you know exactly what it can cost you, there may be no braver thing a person can do. Now let's watch him keep that hand open one more time. At the worst possible moment in front of everyone with a knife already in his chest. At the great war that would end his life, a war we will come to properly in a while, Whitebeard was betrayed a second time, and his answer to it is one of the finest moments in the whole story. There was a captain among his allies, a man named Squard, whose own crew had been destroyed years before by Roger, and who therefore carried an old, raw wound about the pirate king and his bloodline. And the enemy, knowing this, whispered a lie into that wound. They told Squard that Whitebeard had secretly cut a deal with the government, that he had agreed to sacrifice all of the lesser allied crews, Squard's included, in exchange for saving only Ace, the son of his old rival Roger. It was not true. None of it was true. But it was aimed precisely at the softest, most frightened place in Squard's heart, and in his grief and his terror and his sense of betrayal, Squard ran his sword straight through Whitebeard's chest. And Whitebeard let him. That is the almost unbelievable part. He saw the blade coming, and he could have stopped it. The strongest man in the world could have stopped a single sword without thinking. And he chose to let it land, to take the wound from his own frightened son rather than raise a hand against him. And then, with the blade still in him, he reached out and pulled the trembling, horrified young man into an embrace. He did not strike back, he did not cast him out, he held him. And he said the thing that is the very heart of his idea of greatness, that a truly great man, a real captain, is not the kind of small, frightened person who answers a knife with a knife. He forgave Squard completely in front of the entire war, and by forgiving him, he exposed the lie for what it was, and pulled his shaken family back together. He turned a betrayal into a demonstration. He took the worst thing one of his sons could do to him and used it to show every other son watching exactly what kind of father they had. There is a whole ethics folded into that embrace, and it is worth unfolding slowly as you drift. Most of us believe somewhere down deep in a kind of fairness that is really just symmetry. A knife for a knife, a wound for a wound. You hurt me, so I'm allowed to hurt you back. It feels like justice. It is, in fact, just the pain continuing itself, passed from hand to hand forever. And Whitebeard's answer to that is to say, no. A great person is precisely someone who can stop the pain from continuing through them, who can absorb the blow and not pass it on, who can take the knife and answer with an embrace, and in doing so, break the chain. It costs him. It literally costs him blood. But he understood that greatness is not measured by what you are strong enough to do to people. It is measured by what you are strong enough not to do, even when they have given you every right, especially then. He had a sword in his chest, put there by his own son, and he used his last strength to make sure that son knew he was still loved. If you remember one image of him tonight, you could do worse than that one. And it is worth being clear about how hard the thing he did actually is, because forgiveness is one of those words that has been said so often and so easily that it has almost stopped meaning anything, and Whitebeard hands it its full weight back. Real forgiveness is not pretending you were not hurt. It is not saying it did not matter or pretending the knife was not a knife. Squard really did stab him. The wound was real. The betrayal was real. Forgiveness is not the erasing of the wrong. It is the decision made while the wound is still open and still bleeding, not to let the wrong turn you into something crueler than you were before it happened. It is refusing to let what was done to you become the excuse for what you do next. Squard handed Whitebeard a knife, in every sense, handed him the perfect justification to strike back, to be hard, to close his heart, and no one in the world would have blamed him for taking it. And Whitebeard set the justification down. He looked at the frightened, tricked, grieving young man who had just run a sword through him, and he saw, again, the wound underneath the act. Saw that Squard had not attacked him out of malice, but out of terror and love twisted by a lie. And he answered that wound instead of the injury it had caused him. Think about the chains of hurt that run through every family, every friendship, every human story. The way pain gets passed from hand to hand, one person wounding the next because they themselves were wounded. On and on down the years, A long, dark relay of people answering knives with knives because it feels like justice and is only ever the pain continuing itself. And think of what it takes for one person somewhere in that chain to simply stop, to absorb the blow and not pass it on, to be the place where the hurt finally comes to rest instead of the place it bounces onward. That is what Whitebeard did with his arms around Squard. He made himself the end of the line. The pain reached him, and it stopped there, transformed into an embrace, and it went no further. Every one of us has the chance, more often than we take it, to be that, to be the one who does not answer the knife with a knife, who takes the unfairness and does not pass it down to the next person, who lets the chain of hurt die quietly in our own held tongue. It costs something every time. It cost him blood. But it is maybe the single most healing thing a person can do in this world, to be the place where the hurting stops. Now let's meet the son who could not be forgiven, not out of cruelty, but because he had made himself into the one thing family cannot hold. When Whitebeard and the traitor Teach finally faced each other, near the very end, the old man said something to him that is worth turning over slowly, because it draws a line that his whole philosophy depends on. Teach, by then, had stolen a terrible power and was reaching for more. He had schemes stacked on schemes and a real chance, it seemed, of climbing to the very top of the pirate world himself. And Whitebeard looked at this son who had murdered his brother, this clever, patient, ambitious man who wanted so badly to inherit the age, and he told him plainly that he was not the one, that the man his old rival Roger had been waiting for, the person the whole age was leaning toward, the true heir to the dream, that was not and would never be Teach. Now, on the surface, that is just one pirate insulting another. But underneath it is one of the sharpest ideas in the whole story, and it is this: that wanting power and even seizing power is not the same thing as being worthy of it. Teach wanted to inherit the age more than almost anyone alive. He was willing to betray, to murder, to wait decades, to do absolutely anything to climb. And Whitebeard's judgment of him was not that he was too weak or too small or too late. It was that the very willingness to do anything to get there was precisely the thing that disqualified him. The heir the age was waiting for was never going to be the person who wanted it most or schemed for it hardest. It was going to be someone who carried the dream almost by accident because of who they were rather than what they grasped for. Someone like the laughing boy Whitebeard could already feel rising somewhere out on the seas, who wanted to be free far more than he wanted to be king. Teach had confused ambition with destiny. He thought that if he just wanted the throne badly enough and was ruthless enough to take it, it would make him the chosen one. And Whitebeard, with the clear eyes of a dying man, told him the truth: that some things cannot be seized, only inherited, and that the age does not hand itself to whoever is greediest for it. Worthiness is not a thing you can steal, no matter how strong the fruit you eat. You either carry the dream rightly or you don't, and Teach, for all his cunning, simply did not. It is the difference between a person who wants to be loved and a person who wants to love, between one who wants the crown and one who is fit to wear it. The age was not waiting for the hungriest hand, it never is. And that distinction between the person who wants a thing most and the person who is fit to hold it runs quietly through the whole of life, far beyond any story about pirates. The people most desperate to be loved are so often the hardest to love because their desperation makes them grasping. The people most hungry for power are so often the ones who should never have it because the hunger itself is a kind of disqualification, a sign of a hole they are trying to fill from the outside that can only ever be filled from within. There is a strange law woven through things which the wise have noticed in every age, that the ones truly fit to carry something great are usually the ones not clutching at it, the ones carrying it almost by accident because of who they are, because it fits their hands naturally rather than because they schemed and clawed and betrayed to get it. Teach did everything a person can do to seize the age. He waited decades, he murdered, he stole, he plotted flawlessly. And it did not make him the heir, because the heir is not a position you can take by force. It is a shape you either are or are not. Whitebeard could see that shape, and he could see that Teach was not it. And he could see, out on the horizon, the person who was, A laughing, guileless young man who wanted to be free far more than he ever wanted to be king, who would inherit the whole age precisely because he was not trying to. There is a deep comfort in that idea if you let it settle. For anyone who has ever felt they were not clawing hard enough, not ambitious enough, not hungry enough for the top. The story says, good. The things most worth carrying are not carried by the hungriest. They are carried by the ones who are simply, quietly the right shape to carry them. And you cannot fake that shape, and you cannot steal it, and you do not get it by wanting it more than everyone else. You get it by becoming, slowly and honestly, yourself. Teach wanted it too much, and the wanting was the proof he should not have it. That is one of the oldest truths there is, and Whitebeard, dying, said it to his face. Now let's go to the war itself. The day the whole world found out what Whitebeard's family was willing to do for one of its own. Everything in Whitebeard's life bent, at the last, toward a single day and a single choice. His son Ace, the boy who had come with a knife and stayed to become a brother to 1,600 people, had been captured by the government. And they did not capture him quietly. They announced that they would execute him in public at the very heart of the world's military power in a fortress town called Marineford, and they broadcast it to the entire world. It was a trap, and everyone knew it was a trap. The government's real target was not one young man, it was Whitebeard himself and the whole family behind him. They dangled the son to draw out the father, betting that the strongest man in the world would be foolish enough, sentimental enough, to bring his entire fleet into the jaws of the world's assembled navy, every admiral, every warship, every weapon they had, to save one condemned pirate. And they were right. He came. Of course he came. Old and sick, his body failing, hooked in his quieter hours to tubes and machines just to keep going, the strongest man in the world gathered his sons and his allied fleets and sailed straight into the trap, into the massed guns of the entire world to save one boy. Because that was the whole point of him. That was the meaning of the word pops. It meant someone will come for you, no matter the odds, no matter the cost, no matter how obviously it is a trap. If you are one of his, he will come, and he will bring everyone. The government had built its bet on the idea that this was a weakness, a sentimental flaw they could exploit in an otherwise invincible enemy. And in a cold, tactical sense, they were not wrong. It was the lever that ended him. But watch what it looked like from the inside, because it is one of the most moving things in the whole story. 1,600 of the world's most dangerous outcasts, plus dozens of allied crews sailing knowingly into a war they might not survive, against the entire military might of the planet. Not for treasure, not for territory, not for glory, but to save one brother from a scaffold. An entire nation of the unwanted, throwing itself against the world because the world had one of their family and they were not going to leave him there. That is the family philosophy stated not in words, but in cannon fire. That is what Pops had built. He had taken the loneliest people alive and made them into the kind of family that charges an armada for one of its own. Whatever else you want to say about the wisdom of it, there has never been a purer demonstration of love as a collective act. They went to save him because he would have gone to save any of them. That was simply the deal. That was what belonging to him meant. And I want to sit with the government's miscalculation for a moment because it reveals something true and a little heartbreaking about how power sees love. The world's rulers looked at Whitebeard's devotion to his sons and saw a weakness, a lever, a flaw, a sentimental soft spot in an otherwise unbreakable enemy that they could pry open and use to destroy him. And in the narrowest tactical sense, they were correct. His love for Ace was the thing that drew him into the trap, and the trap did close. And it did cost him everything. Love did make him vulnerable, exactly as they bet it would. But watch how completely they misunderstood what they were looking at, because it is the same mistake the powerful make in every age. They thought his love was a bug. It was the entire program. They thought that a man who would walk into a trap for one son had a fatal flaw. In fact, he had the only thing worth having, and he knew it. And he walked into that trap not because he was foolish, but because a version of himself that would leave his son on a scaffold to save his own skin was not a version of himself he had any interest in surviving as. That is the thing that cold power can never quite compute. That for some people, the willingness to lose everything for someone they love is not a weakness to be exploited, but the very thing that makes their life mean anything at all. The government offered Whitebeard, in effect, a choice. Abandon your son and stay safe and strong, or come for him and be destroyed. And to Whitebeard that was not even a choice, because a safe, strong life bought with the abandonment of his son would not have been a life he recognized as his. He would rather die as the man who came for Ace than live as the man who didn't. And in choosing that, he exposed the emptiness at the heart of all that assembled power arrayed against him. Because the entire military of the world, for all its warships and admirals and weapons, did not have among them a single thing any of them loved enough to die for the way those pirates loved each other. The outlaws had the one thing the Empire lacked. That is why the war, though Whitebeard lost it, reads not as his defeat, but as his vindication. He proved in front of the whole world that his family was real enough to sail into hell for, and no amount of firepower on the other side could manufacture a thing like that. You cannot conscript love, you can only earn it, one unwanted person at a time, over a lifetime, the slow way he did. Now let's stay in that war a moment and look at the old man himself, dying on his feet, and still the most terrifying force on the field. Here's something the story does that is almost unbearably poignant if you slow down enough to feel it. By the time of this last great war, Whitebeard was not in his prime. He was old, 72, and he was sick with some illness the story never even bothers to name because the name does not matter. What matters is that he was dying by inches even before the first shot was fired. In his calmer moments aboard his ship, he was shown hooked up to medical machines, tubes running into him, nurses at his side, a giant of a man reduced in his own body to something frail. The lion in winter, and then the war began. And this frail, dying, tube-fed old man stood up and cracked the world. Even then, even at the very end, even with his body giving out beneath him, Whitebeard was still, by a wide margin, the single most powerful force on that entire battlefield. He shattered the air itself and sent quakes tearing through the ranks of the world's navy. He seized the sea and raised tsunamis tall enough to swallow warships, tilting the whole bay. He split the ground of the Great Plaza, the assembled might of the entire world, its admirals, its fleets, its weapons, and the most frightening thing on the field was a dying old man on borrowed strength who should, by every measure of his failing body, have been in a sickbed. There is a specific kind of dignity in that image that is worth carrying with you because it is a truth about how a life can end. We tend to imagine that decline is only loss, that to grow old and sick is simply to fade, to diminish, to become less. And Whitebeard's last day is a refusal of that idea. His body was failing, and it did not matter because the thing that made him who he was had never really lived in his body. It lived in his will, and his will did not age. He was less than he had been, and he was still more than everyone else. And he spent that last diminished strength not on himself, not on survival, not on the treasure he could still have chased, but entirely on his son. The lion in winter is still a lion. And a person who has spent their strength well their whole life still has something left to spend right at the end on the people they love. And there is no more beautiful way to spend the last of yourself than that. There is a tenderness in those images of him on the ship, the giant hooked to tubes, the nurses at his side, the monitors beeping softly beside the most powerful man in the world. That is worth resting in because it holds a truth about aging and dying that our culture works very hard to hide from. We are taught to fear decline, to see the failing body as pure humiliation, as the erasure of the person we were. And Whitebeard's last chapter quietly refuses that fear. Yes, his body was going. Yes, he needed help to keep his heart beating and his lungs full. Yes, he was, by the raw physical measure, a fraction of the force he had been. And none of it touched the thing that made him himself because that thing had never lived in the muscle. It lived in the will, in the love, in the decision, renewed every single day to be a shelter for other people. And a decision does not weaken with age. If anything, it grows stronger, more distilled, more certain of what matters, as everything inessential is stripped away. The old, sick Whitebeard knew exactly who he was and exactly what he was for in a way the young, invincible Whitebeard maybe never had to. And so his decline was not a diminishment, but a clarification. Stripped of his prime, hooked to machines, he was more purely himself than ever. A father, spending the last of a failing body entirely on his children, with nothing held back for his own survival because his own survival had stopped being the point a long time ago. There is a way to grow old and a way to face the failing of the body that the story is quietly offering us here. not as a tragedy of loss, but as a burning down to the essential, a life reduced by age to its purest flame. He could not do everything anymore. He could still do the one thing that mattered, stand between the people he loved and the thing that was coming for them. And he did it with the very last of himself. And it was enough. And it was beautiful. The lion in winter does not mourn the summer. He spends what warmth he has left keeping the cubs alive through the cold. That is not the sad end of a strong life. That is its consummation. Now let's go to the heart of it, to the son he came to save, and to the truest words in all of One Piece. I have to tell you how it ended for Ace, and it is the saddest and the most important part of the whole night, so let me tell it gently. Against all the odds, in the middle of that impossible war, they very nearly did it. They fought their way to the scaffold. Ace was freed. For one shining, breathless moment, the impossible rescue had worked, and the boy who came with the knife was going to make it home. And then it went wrong, the way these things do on a single word and a single choice. The enemy cruelly goaded Ace, struck at his pride, at that old raw wound about his birth and his worth. And Ace, who had spent his whole life unable to walk away from an insult about whether he deserved to exist, turned back. And in turning back, he put himself between his little brother, Luffy, and a killing blow. And he took it. A strike meant for his brother went through Ace instead, and the fire went out of him, and he died there in the middle of the war that had been fought to save him in his little brother's arms. And with the last of himself, Ace said the thing that the entire story of Whitebeard has been building toward, the thing that is the whole point, the treasure at the bottom of all of it. He had spent his life tormented by a single question, whether he should ever have been born at all. He carried what the world called the blood of a demon, the son of the most wanted man in history, told from birth that his very existence was a sin. And there, dying, surrounded by the family that had come, 1,600 people who had sailed into the world's guns for him, he finally had his answer. His last words were not about revenge or the treasure or the war. They were a thank you. He said that even though he had been good for nothing his whole life, even though he carried the blood of a demon within him, they had still loved him. And he thanked them for it. That was his final thought and his final breath. Gratitude that he had been loved anyway. Sit with that, because it is the entire philosophy of Whitebeard delivered in a dying boy's voice. Everything the old man built, the family, the open hand, the word pops, the refusal of the crown, the whole enormous shelter he made of his own frightening strength. All of it existed so that one unwanted person could die knowing they had been loved. That was the treasure, not the One Piece, not the throne of the world. This, a person who had been told their whole life that they should not exist, getting to leave the world certain that they had mattered to someone, that their being alive had been a good thing, that they were wanted. The war was, in the coldest terms, a failure. They did not save him. And it was, in the only terms that mattered to Whitebeard, a complete success, because Ace did not die the way he had lived, alone and unsure of his own worth. He died held. He died thanking people for loving him. Whitebeard spent everything he had and lost, and the losing bought the one thing his whole life was about, a lonely person at the end, knowing for certain that they were not alone. If you take nothing else from tonight, take that. The whole point of getting strong, the whole point of building a family, the whole point of any of it, was so that someone could say thank you for loving me and mean it before the dark. And here is why those particular words cut so deep, why fans of this story weep at them years later, why they belong at the very center of a night like this one. Because they are, quietly, the words all of us are hoping to be able to say and to hear at the end. Strip away the pirates and the war and the fire, and what Ace is really doing in that moment is the thing every human heart is secretly trying to do with its whole life. To arrive at the end and find that despite everything, despite our failures, despite the parts of ourselves we are ashamed of, despite the blood we carry and the wrongs we have done, and the deep, private conviction so many of us hold that we are not quite worthy of love. Despite all of it, we were loved anyway. That is the thing. Not that we earned it, not that we deserved it, that it came to us anyway, freely, in spite of everything, and that we got to feel it before we went. Ace spent his whole short life believing he should never have been born, that his very existence was a mistake the world would be better without, and the gift Whitebeard gave him, the whole reason the old man's life had any shape at all, was that Ace got to die knowing that belief was wrong, that he had been wanted, that his being alive had been, for a family of thousands, a good thing, a gift, a joy. Think, as you lie there in the dark, of how much of human sorrow is just people not sure they are loved, the child who never heard it, the friend who drifted away wondering, the parent who died before the words got said. So much pain in so many lives is simply the ache of not knowing for certain that you mattered to someone. And so much healing, when it comes, is just someone finally saying it plainly in time. Whitebeard built an entire life, an entire family, an entire philosophy, so that the people the world had thrown away could die knowing the thing Ace died knowing. That they were loved. That is the whole treasure, the real one piece, the thing at the bottom of the deepest sea in the story. Not gold, not power, not a throne, just a person at the end, certain they were not alone and grateful. If there is anyone in your life who does not know for certain that you love them, tomorrow or the next day you might tell them. It is the one treasure you can give away for free, and the story says it is worth more than the throne of the whole world. Rest here a while in that. It is a heavy and a beautiful thing, and we are nearly at the end. Now let's watch the old man himself go, standing up, facing forward, saying one last thing to the whole world. After Ace died, Whitebeard did not run, and he did not break, though the story makes very clear that his heart did. He had lost the son he came to save in front of him, in the middle of a war he had started for that exact purpose. And with that grief on him, old and dying, and now with nothing left to save, he did the last thing a father does. He covered the retreat. He turned and stood between his remaining sons and the entire military of the world. And he told them to run, to get away, to live, to carry on, while he held the line alone. He gave the last hour of his life to buying time for his family to escape, planting himself like a wall between them and the guns. And then he died the way he had lived. When it was over, when the strongest man in the world finally stopped, they found that he had died standing up. On his feet, he never fell. His enormous body, when they counted, bore more than 460 wounds. The exact tally the story gives is 267 sword wounds, 152 gunshot wounds, 46 cannonball wounds, and more. Besides, a hole burned through him, an entire war written into his flesh. And not one of those wounds was on his back. Every single injury was on his front, because in a lifetime of battle he had never once turned and run from an enemy. And he did not turn now. He stood there, dead, upright, facing forward, and his body would not fall. I want to stay on that image because there is a whole philosophy of how to die folded into it, and by extension, a whole philosophy of how to live. He believed, and he said as much in his own words, that a scar on the back is a swordsman's shame, that how you face things is the truest statement you ever make about who you are. To take your wounds on the front is to say, I never ran, I never turned away from what was coming. I met my life and my death head on and looked them in the eye. And there is something in that we can all reach for, even those of us who will never fight anything more dramatic than a hard year. Because most of us, most of the time, are tempted to turn away. From the difficult conversation, from the grief we don't want to feel, from the fear, from the end. To take your wounds on the front is simply to refuse to look away from your own life. It is to be present for the hard parts, to face them, to let them mark you honestly rather than fleeing and pretending. Whitebeard died with a body covered in the evidence that he had never once flinched. And whatever you think of the man, of pirates, of any of it, there is a quiet challenge in that upright, riddled body that reaches right out of the story and into your own dark room tonight. When your hard things come, and they will you meet them facing forward? He did. Right to the end he did. And there's something almost unbearably dignified in the specific way his body refused to fall, that rewards one more moment of quiet attention. He was dead, truly dead, run through, riddled, his great heart finally stopped. And still he stood upright, facing the enemy, because his body in that final instant simply did what his whole life had trained it to do, which was to not go down, to not turn away, to hold the line one more second for the sake of the people behind him. His corpse kept doing his job after his soul had left it. That is what a lifetime of facing forward looks like at the very end. The posture becomes so deep, so total, so much who you are, that not even death can bend it. He did not choose to die standing in his last moment. He had chosen it in 10,000 earlier moments, every time he refused to run, until standing was simply the shape his body knew, the only shape it had left. And that is the real lesson hidden in the image, the one that reaches past the drama of a battlefield and into an ordinary life like yours. We do not, most of us, get to choose how we meet the final hard things all at once, in a single heroic instant. We build the way we will meet them slowly, quietly, in 1,000 small, ordinary moments long before. Every time we have the difficult conversation instead of avoiding it, every time we sit with a grief instead of numbing it, every time we face the frightening thing rather than turning our back and pretending it is not there. Courage is not a decision you make when the crisis arrives. It is a habit you have been building or failing to build your whole life, so that when the crisis comes, you meet it as the person all those small choices have made you. Whitebeard stood at the end because he had been standing his whole life. He faced death forward because he had faced everything forward. How you meet the small hard things quietly when no one is watching is how you will meet the last one. He spent 72 years practicing facing forward. And so, when the final darkness came, his body knew nothing else to do but face it too. Rest in that, and perhaps let it ask you very gently which direction you have been practicing. Now let's hear the very last thing he said, the sentence that changed the whole world. Whitebeard had one more thing to do before he went, and it was the largest thing he ever did. Larger than any battle, larger than his whole empire of family. And he did it with a single sentence, spoken with his dying breath to the entire watching world. Remember, this whole war had been broadcast everywhere. The whole world was watching the strongest man in existence die. The government's hope was that his death would be the end of an era, that with the old monster gone, the great age of piracy would lose its heart, and people would lose their nerve, and the seas would grow quiet and obedient again. They wanted his death to be a full stop, and Whitebeard, with the very last of his breath, turned it into a beginning instead. Because the thing every pirate secretly wonders, the thing the government most wants people to doubt, is whether the great treasure at the end of the world, the One Piece, is even real, or just a beautiful lie that lures foolish men to their deaths. And Whitebeard, who had known Roger, who had heard the truth from the king of the pirates himself on that ship long ago, used his last words to settle it forever. He told the whole watching world that the One Piece is real. He confirmed it, with his dying breath, to everyone. That the treasure exists, that the dream is not a lie, that somewhere out there it is waiting for someone to find it, and that when they do, it will shake the world to its foundations. With one sentence, a dying old man took the government's attempt to end the Age of Dreams and turned it into the spark that set the whole world on fire. He did not go quietly into being a warning. He made himself an invitation. Think about the enormous generosity of that final act, because it is the culmination of everything. He was dying. He had lost his son. He owed the world nothing. And he spent his very last breath, the single most valuable thing a dying person has, not on a curse, not on regret, not on a goodbye to his own family, but on a gift to millions of strangers he would never meet. He handed the future its dream back. He looked at a whole generation of young people the government wanted to frighten into small, safe, obedient lives. And he told them the treasure was real. Go and find it. The age is yours. It is exactly what Roger did for him on that ship all those years ago. Hand the future to people you will never see and trust them to carry it. Whitebeard died the way he lived, giving. His last act was to make sure that the dream outlived him, that the thing he cared about was carried on by strangers, that his death was a door and not a wall. The strongest man in the world used his final second of life to make the world bigger for everyone who came after him. That is a way to go. That is maybe the way to go. And there is a defiance in that last sentence of his that is worth savoring, because it is the final expression of everything he believed. The government did not just want him dead, they wanted his death to mean a particular thing. They wanted it to say to the whole watching world, "See, even the strongest is crushed in the end. The dream is futile. Go home, be small, be safe, be obedient, stop reaching." His death was supposed to be their argument, a full stop at the end of an age of daring. And with a single sentence, an old dying man reached out and rewrote the meaning of his own death out from under them. He turned their period into an exclamation point. He made his ending into a beginning. "You wanted my death to close the age," he said, in effect. "And instead, I will make it the thing that opens it. You cannot own what my dying means. I do. And what it means is, the dream is real, so go." That is a power greater than any earthquake he could summon. The power to author the meaning of your own ending, to refuse to let the people who defeat you decide what your defeat stands for. And it too is a thing available, in smaller forms, to ordinary people facing ordinary endings. We do not get to choose whether the hard things come, or even always whether we survive them. But there is very often a sliver of freedom left, right at the end of things, in what we decide the ending will mean. Whether a loss becomes a bitterness we hand to everyone around us, or a gift we somehow turn outward. Whether we spend our last strength cursing the dark, or lighting something for the people who come after. Whitebeard, with the single most valuable breath he had left, chose to hand the future a dream instead of a warning. He decided, right to the end, that his life would be, in its very last act, a thing that made other people braver. There is no more generous way to close a story. He did not go out taking. He went out giving the whole world permission to hope. Now let's talk about the strangest thing of all. The fact that a man who died so completely is, in the only sense that matters, still not gone. There is a line in one piece, and it is important to me that I tell you it is not Whitebeard's line, though it is his truth. It belongs to an old, foolish, wonderful doctor named Hiluluk from much earlier in the story, a man who died believing in something everyone told him was a lie. And Hiluluk, facing his own end, asked a question and answered it, and the answer has echoed through the whole story ever since. "When does a man die?" he asked. "Is it when he is shot through with a bullet? No. Is it when he is eaten away by an incurable disease? No. Is it when he swallows a poison soup? No. A man dies," Hiluluk said, "when he is forgotten. That is the only real death there is, not the stopping of the heart, the fading of the memory. You are truly gone only when the last person who carried you in their mind lets you go." And by that measure, the only measure the story finally believes in, Whitebeard did not die at Marineford, and has not died since, and may not die for a very long time, if ever. Because look at what he built to be remembered by. 1,600 sons and dozens of allied crews scattered now across the seas, hunted, grieving, but every one of them carrying him in their chest, telling his story, flying marks descended from his flag, becoming themselves fathers and shelters to the next generation of the unwanted. A whole world that watched him die and heard his last words and was changed by them. An entire age of dreamers set in motion by his final sentence. A little poor island called Sphinx that he protected, that remembers the orphan who came home strong. He engineered, without ever using the word, his own immortality. Not through treasure, not through a monument, not through a bloodline, but through the oldest and surest method there is. He made himself unforgettable by making himself matter to enough people. He loved so many so well that he cannot be forgotten, and so, by the story's own rule, he cannot truly die. The man who wanted a family instead of a crown chose, whether he knew it or not, the one form of immortality that actually works. Kings are forgotten. Fathers, if they are good enough, are carried forever. He is carried still. And this is a truth you can hold on to long after you have forgotten every other detail of tonight, because it applies to every single life, including yours, including mine. None of us the strongest in the world. Most of us destined to leave behind no monument, no treasure, no name in any history book. The story insists, through that old doctor's question, that none of that is what immortality is actually made of. The pharaohs built pyramids the size of mountains to be remembered. and we remember the stone and have forgotten the men inside it. Conquerors carved their names across whole continents, and the names are just sounds now, attached to nothing that loved anyone. That is not being remembered. That is just being recorded. The kind of remembrance that is actually a kind of life, the kind that keeps a person warm in the world after their heart has stopped, is not made of monuments at all. It is made of people. It is made of the person who thinks of you when they face something hard and asks themselves what you would have done. It is made of the kindness you showed someone that they pass on years later to a stranger, never mentioning your name, not even remembering it was you, but carrying you anyway in the shape of the act. It is made of the ways you loved people well enough that the love outlives you and goes on doing its work in the world through the people you gave it to. Whitebeard will be remembered in the story for 1,000 years, not because he was strong. The world is full of forgotten strong men, but because he was kind at an enormous scale, because he loved so many people so well that the love could not fit inside one lifetime and spilled out past his death into all of theirs. And that road is open to every one of us at whatever scale our life allows. You do not need 1,600 sons. You need only to love the few people in your reach well enough, truly enough, that some part of that love keeps moving through the world after you are gone. That is the immortality that is actually on offer to ordinary people. And it is a real one. And it is earned exactly the way he earned it. One act of shelter, one open hand, one person made to feel less alone at a time. A man dies when he is forgotten. So the whole secret of not dying, it turns out, is startlingly simple and available to anyone, and free. Love people so well that they cannot let you go. Now let's bring him home at the very last to the island where it all began. When the war was finally over, another great pirate, a red-haired man named Shanks, once a boy on Roger's ship, and someone Whitebeard had known and respected, arrived and brought it to a close, and he did one last, quiet, decent thing. He arranged for Whitebeard and Ace to be buried properly, with dignity, side by side, the father and the son laid to rest together on an island near Sphinx, near the poor, forgotten little rock where the orphan had started with nothing. Whitebeard's great coat and his enormous weapon planted upright like a grave marker stand over the place. And so the story closes its own circle, softly. The orphan from the island the world forgot came home to the island the world forgot, at the end, not alone but beside his son, remembered, mourned by thousands, having spent a whole life making sure that the loneliness he was born into would end with him and not be passed on. There is a deep rightness to that homecoming that is worth resting in as we come to the end. He began as a boy with no family on a rock too poor to matter. He ended as the father of thousands, buried beside a son who died thanking him for love, on the shore of the very place he came from, mourned by a world he had made larger. The distance between those 2 points, the lonely orphan and the beloved father laid to rest, is the whole of his philosophy, walked out over 72 years. He took the worst hand a person can be dealt, the hand of being unwanted, and he played it into the richest possible life, not by getting the things the world says are rich, but by becoming, for as many people as he could reach, the thing he had never had. He came home to Sphinx having answered his own first wound completely. No one who sailed with him ever had to be as alone as he had been. That was the work, that was the treasure, that was enough. There is a particular kind of peace in a homecoming like that, and it is the peace of a life that closed the circle it opened, a life that ended by answering the exact question it began with. He was born asking, in the wordless way a hungry orphan asks, whether anyone would ever want him, whether there was a place in the world for a child like him, whether he mattered. And he spent 72 years answering that question, not for himself, but for everyone else who was ever asking it. And then, at the very end, they carried him home to the shore of the place where the asking started, and laid him down beside a son who had died saying thank you for the love, mourned by thousands who could not imagine the world without him. The orphan got his answer. Yes, you mattered, you were wanted. Look how many people you leave behind who cannot let you go. He came home to the poor, forgotten island not as the boy who had nothing, but as the man who had given everything, and the distance he had traveled between those two was not measured in gold or in conquest, but in the single most valuable thing a life can be measured in. The number of people who were less alone because he had lived. And maybe that is the quietest and the best thing to carry with you down into sleep, out of this whole long story of a giant with a white mustache. That a life does not have to be measured the way the world usually measures it, by how much you gathered, or how high you climbed, or how many people knew your name. That there is another measure, older and truer, and it fits the smallest life as well as the largest. How many people were sheltered because you were here? How many were fed and defended and believed in, and made to feel, even once, that they were not alone? By that measure, a poor orphan from a forgotten island became one of the richest men who ever lived, and came home at the end to prove it. And by that measure, your own life, whatever it looks like from the outside, however small it may sometimes feel, is being written every day in every kindness, every open hand, every person you make a little less alone. That is the treasure. It was always the treasure. Rest now, knowing you are closer to it than you think. So that is the whole of it. The philosophy of a giant with a white mustache, laid out from a poor island to a quiet grave. Let's gather it up gently and then let you sleep. Everything about Whitebeard, in the end, comes down to a handful of quiet convictions, and they are worth holding all together one last time as the night closes. That family is something you choose, not something you are given, and that the family you choose can be truer and stronger than any tie of blood. That the point of strength is not to take, but to shelter. That whatever power you are given, in whatever form, is best spent keeping the people you love out of the rain. That love should be offered before it is earned, freely, even to the dangerous and the unwanted, even knowing that some of them will use your open hand against you because the ones it saves are worth the ones who wound you. That greatness is measured not by what you are strong enough to do to people, but by what you are strong enough not to do. That a great person answers a knife with an embrace. That you should meet your life facing forward and take your wounds on the front and never run from the hard things. That the deepest thing you can do with your last breath is give the future back its dream. And that a person truly dies only when they are forgotten, which means that the surest immortality there is simply to love enough people well enough that you cannot be let go. And notice how all of those convictions, laid side by side, turn out to be the same conviction wearing different clothes. Family over blood, strength as shelter, love offered before it is earned, greatness as restraint, facing forward, giving the future its dream, becoming unforgettable through love. They are not 7 separate ideas. They are 7 faces of one idea. And the idea is almost embarrassingly simple, so simple that a person could easily hear it and think they already knew it and move on. The idea is, other people are the point. That is the whole of it. That the meaning of a life is not found in what you accumulate for yourself, but in what you give to others. That strength and cleverness and even survival are only worth anything insofar as they let you shelter someone. That at the very end, on the scaffold or in the sickbed or wherever your own end finds you, the only question that will actually matter is not how much you had or how high you rose, but whether you loved and were loved and left the people in your reach a little less alone than you found them. Whitebeard knew that from the beginning as a starving orphan in the place where a person learns such things, the place of having nothing and aching for someone. And he never once forgot it through 72 years and all the power in the world, which is the rarest thing of all, because most people who learn that truth in their poverty forget it the moment they get a little strength and spend the rest of their lives chasing the wrong treasure up the wrong ladder. The strongest man in the world never forgot what he learned when he was weak. That, in the end, is the whole miracle of him. He got everything, and it did not corrupt the thing he had understood when he had nothing. He stayed to his dying breath a poor orphan who knew that the only thing worth having is each other. And he simply had the power and the years and the enormous open heart to act on that knowledge at a scale no one else ever has. He is not a hard man to understand. He is only a hard man to be, because the knowing is easy and almost everyone has it somewhere. It is the never forgetting that is difficult, the holding on to it through all the years and all the temptations to want something colder and higher and more impressive. He held on the way Odin held that anchor, except he never let go of the thing that mattered even once, all the way to the end. He was the strongest man in the world, and he could have had anything. And all he ever wanted was a family and a place to belong. He never found the great treasure at the end of the world, and he never once looked for it, because he already had the only treasure he cared about, and it called him Pops, and it charged an entire navy to try to save him. He died standing up, covered in wounds, none of them on his back, with his son's thank you still in the air and the whole world listening to him say that the dream was real. And somewhere out on the seas tonight, in the fiction of that world, 1,600 suns are still carrying him, and so he is not gone. He is only sleeping the way you are about to sleep, in a world made a little warmer because he was in it. There is nothing left to follow now, and nowhere you have to be. So let it all settle. Think, if you like, as you drift off, of the people who have been a shelter to you and the people you have been a shelter to, the family you were given and the family you chose, because that, in the end, is the only thing this whole long story was ever really about. Think of an old man who wanted nothing but for no one to be as alone as he once was. Think of a poor island and a boy with nothing who grew up to be someone's father, and then everyone's father, and came home at the last beside a son who loved him. And think, most of all, of the people who chose you and the people you have chosen, because that, in the end, is the piece of him that belongs to you. Somewhere in your life there is almost certainly a Whitebeard, or the memory of one, a person who did not have to care for you and did anyway, who made a place for you when you were unsure there was one, who was a shelter to you in some season when you needed shelter. And somewhere in your life there is almost certainly someone for whom you are that person, whether you have ever noticed it or not, someone who is a little less alone in the world because you are in it, someone who carries you in their chest the way those 1,600 sons carried their Pops. Family, the story keeps insisting, is not only the one you are born into, it is the one you build and the one that builds itself quietly around you out of everyone who chose to stay. And that family is the realest and most durable thing you will ever have, realer than any achievement, more lasting than anything you could ever own, the one part of your life that keeps its warmth after everything else has gone cold. So as you drift off tonight, you might let the old man leave you with the only homework he ever really gave anyone, which is no homework at all, only an invitation. To be, for the people in your reach, a little of what he was, for his, a shelter, an open hand, a place to belong, a reason for someone to feel less alone. You do not need to be the strongest person in the world to do it. He would be the first to tell you that the strength was never the point. You only need to decide, the way he decided on a poor island a long time ago, that the loneliness stops with you. That is the whole of his philosophy, and it is yours now too, to keep or to set down as you like. But it is a good thing to fall asleep holding. The seas will still be there in the morning, and so will the dream, and there is no hurry to find any treasure tonight or ever. You are already holding the only one that matters if you have even one person who would come for you and one person you would come for. Rest now. You are in good company. Sleep well and be well, and know that you are not as alone as you sometimes feel. Good night.